And we're live.
Hi,
Good
Maeve.
morning. Good morning.
How are you?
I'm good. I fixed your name, Frances, so now you're not just Frances anymore. You're Frances Mackin.
Frances Mac. Thank you so much, Maeve
You're
Daly.
welcome. It's interesting about our names and how important a name can be for us, or not.
Yes.
Um,
Mm.
how we identify ourselves. So I remember being in a class and somebody called the teacher a different name. And her
Mm.
answer really intrigued me. She said, I don't mind what you call me. I'm not attached to my name. I was like, ooh,
Wow.
I know. Where a lot of us think, well, if somebody can't get our name right,
Yeah. It can be a little bit annoying or upsetting, maybe.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, sorry, anyway, we're chatting away, and you're all very welcome. Those who've joined in the background, we have 7 of our global fan club, Francis, that have joined us this morning. Good
Aw.
morning,
Good
everybody.
morning.
You're very welcome to the rambling tangents of myself and my colleague, Frances Mackin.
That's me. That's me. There.
And we try to talk about mental health as openly as possible. And thanks to all our global fan base that bring in their questions that help us work through different issues. But we were talking last night, Francis, and we were wondering what we would talk about today.
Mm.
And we thought maybe addiction might be a good topic to
Yes.
lift the lid on.
Why not? And of course, there may be a question, a live question, and of course, that's welcome too. If there's anybody there that wants to post in a question. But yeah, I just thought it might be an interesting topic. I know we did talk about it maybe last year, didn't
Yeah.
we, Maeve? Mm.
I doubt there's much that we haven't touched on,
I thought the same myself. Yeah.
but it is one that has such a list of things
Mm.
in under one heading.
Yeah.
So even just looking at my shelf before we came on live, chronic shame, a thirst for wholeness, food addiction anonymous, and also I have here some other addiction book here
Mm-hmm.
that there's an awful lot written about it.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
Lisa has just joined us, so I'll put up now that I can do this high tech stuff.
well, good. Thank you, Lisa. Well, sorry, I'm good. I think Maeve is good too, but I shouldn't answer for her. Hope you're well, Lisa.
And we also have Vicky joining
Hi,
us this morning.
hi,
Good
Vicky.
morning, Vicky. And everybody else there in the background, you're all very welcome. I don't know if any of you guys in the background have anything to say or questions to ask about addiction. So, where would you like to start, Francis?
So, just when you were saying there about there isn't really a topic that we haven't covered, and you know the books that are there. I had this thought the other day because I thought the exact same thing when I was thinking about addiction. I was saying we did talk about it, but even when I think back to when we started this and the topics that we covered and discussed, I have still learnt in the last 12 months or so, I still have learnt more. I even think that I've learned a whole lot more in the last 12 months or so about, you know, what would we call it? Stuff. Mental health stuff. But this, okay, so I'll start at the beginning. I did buy this book. I know I talked about it or mentioned it a few weeks ago. And when I looked at it, because I don't know about you, but when I'm looking at a book, the title or the cover of the book catches me. I might know exactly what's inside the book, but I'll be drawn to the title. And I don't know, I didn't really see that bit in it, okay? So I thought, okay, so this is a bit more geared towards addiction. But I think when we talk about trauma and we talk about trauma response, addiction is one of the trauma responses that we have as human beings. So, you know, while it's specific to addiction, I mean, we can really relate it back to anything like depression or anxiety, and then of course there's a host of expressions, if you like, that come under the umbrella of addiction, right? Because you had the book there about food. What was it called again?
Food Addicts Anonymous, the thirst for wholeness, attachment addiction and the spiritual path, chronic shame, which is of course a big part of that whole addiction thing. I think what struck me, I don't know if you've seen it yet, I might post the link here afterwards. Our good friend Gabor Mate, the trauma expert, he was there's a new movie out with him talking about addiction and working on the streets with addicts. And he made a comment in it. There was some question, and I really should have got it correctly worded before we went live, but the essence of it were all addicts traumatized. I forget it now. But what he was trying to say was that not everybody are all addicts traumatized. He said, not everybody who's been traumatized. Is that it?
Yeah, I think I've heard him say this before. So not. Oh, I know what you're talking about, but we'll find it. So if we say not every traumatized person is an addict, but every addict
has been traumatized. Yes, I think that's it.
Yeah.
So that really opened up my brain, going, "Oh my God!"
Yes.
Started looking at things in a different lens. And just to have a sidetrack here, Anya's just joined us as well. And Anya, you're very welcome. Anya. She has a high diddly deadly dough. I don't know if I've read that properly.
Yeah, that's lovely.
Yeah. Right back at you, Anya. So for me, that's a whole new way of looking at addiction.
Totally. But I suppose the other thing that had it in my head was I watched the program about Amy Winehouse last week. I think it was on last weekend. And it was her family and her very close friends were speaking about her. And I don't know if you're very familiar with her, but I mean, I loved her music. She was 27 when she died. So she would be 37 now. And I mean, there was so much that they spoke about, but one of the things that really hit me and it made me kind of go, yes, at the television, was one of her very close friends was talking about, I suppose, because she was in the public eye, she was a celebrity, what we see what the world sees is somebody in the throes of addiction, whether it was drugs or alcohol. And what the people close to her saw was what was underneath it. So I often use the image of an iceberg when I'm, talking to people. I think the iceberg that's over the water is what we see. And then underneath, the iceberg underneath is huge. And then that's what isn't seen, or maybe isn't acknowledged. Is the huge, I think the words they used was her mental health. So that wasn't the conversation piece. The conversation piece was her addiction. So when you talk about what Gabor said, we're not having the correct conversation when it comes to addiction.
Yeah.
Because we have to start talking about trauma. So yeah, and also in the book they talk about how addiction is treated as a medical issue, illness, if you like, disease. Now I will go along with the dis-ease, and look at, here I am, I'm just in my little corner of the world doing my little thing. I'm not a doctor, I don't work under a medical framework, but we are aware of the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, where disorders are
Neatly put in bullet point forms.
Yeah. But I just read a little bit. If I don't know, am I okay to read a little bit from this book? Would that be too much?
We can do anything, if that's all right with our global family.
I hope people don't mind humouring me with this, but this is something that you and I have spoken about before. It's for me a very restrictive way of looking at something, at humanity. It's quite dehumanizing. Anyway, I'll read what, and this is Jan Winnell, by the way. This is the author. This is what she's saying. So, addiction according to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. If we understand addiction as a disease, diagnosing becomes the next step in treatment. The DSM of mental disorders was first published by the American Psychiatric Association as a way of offering a common language and standard criteria for diagnosing mental disorders. A top-down process. So again, the top-down, the top of the brain, where logic, reasoning, self-reflection, executive functioning, all those things, that's where that lives. So it's top down, and even when you think of that as top down, it's almost like pushing down on, the emotional center, the distressed center. That's what I feel. Yeah, that's what I feel when top down. So like we'll just push it down rather than bottom up. So as a top-down process, it offers specific units or diagnostic categories with which to understand psychological distress. It has become the Bible for treating people suffering from mental illness. It's interesting to note that the preamble to DSM-3, which was in 1980, I think we're on 5. Are we on 5 now?
Yeah.
DSM-5. There we are. So this is in quotations. Warned explicitly that its categories were insufficiently precise to be used in forensic settings or for insurance purposes. Now, that was written by Van der Kolk, Bessel van der Kolk, who has wrote The Body Keeps Score. So my understanding of that is that, it's so the categories were insufficiently precise. So it's a little bit like they take clusters of symptoms or behaviors and they say, okay, well, this is what we'll call that.
Yeah.
And we'll add disorder onto it.
Yeah.
And we'll deal with it medically, rather than coming from the bottom up and going, what's it like for you? What's happening? Tell me your story.
Yeah.
So
Vicky has just joined us as well, and Vicky was saying Vicky, that she finds addiction so sad, really difficult to look at.
Yeah, totally.
Because nobody really wants to know, do they? They just want you to stop being addicted, or
yeah. And of course, there's messy addiction, isn't it? The in-your-face messy addiction, the drugs and the alcohol, the gambling, sex, food. But we all have addictive behaviors, and
is there such a thing as an addictive personality, Frances?
I don't really buy into that.
Yeah.
I know we talked a little bit about that, and God, I know I wrote down notes the last time we talked about that. But I think what it is, if we look at it, that it's a trauma response. So what happens is when our system registers trauma and we respond to it, we don't consciously decide, you know what, today I am going to drink myself silly. That's not what, and it's an unconscious adaptation.
Yeah.
So, and I remember way back when we did our module on addiction, we had a lady from the Rutland Centre come in. Her name escapes me at the moment, but one of the very first things she said is that all addicts are searching for something. And I think Gabor talks about this as well, that there's the pain is too much, it's overwhelming, and they need something to regulate them or to just find comfort. And maybe it's with drugs, maybe it's with alcohol, maybe it's with a behavior. Yeah. If we really look at how we engage in life, you and I, Maeve, or anybody that's listening there, are there things that we do all of the time that just serve as it keeps me okay?
Yeah. Helps regulate us.
Helps regulate us, yeah. But to the world, they don't necessarily look messy. They're not a nuisance like all these drug addicts are, and these people that won't stop drinking. They're nuisances to society.
Yeah.
So what Vicky said, it is very sad, because what they are trying to do is just respond to something that has been too much to bear for them. So again, it's looking underneath the iceberg, as opposed to just looking at.
Vicky's agreeing with you. A whole different level, talking to somebody than going with the medical approach, plastering issues up with medication.
Absolutely. Yeah. You said that so succinctly, Vicky. I went on a complete ramble and tangent.
That's what we do, Frances. We're the ramblers and tangents.
Yeah. But yeah, I suppose I feel quite. Okay. Sorry, Maeve. No, you go ahead. I've done a lot of talking.
We would have studied neuroplasticity in our training, Frances. And an aspect of the neuroplasticity says, correct me now if I'm wrong, that when we experience trauma, faulty brain circuitry ensues.
Yeah.
and how that faulty circuitry can look like different things. And that maybe then addiction of any substance, from sex to drink, can in somehow in that faulty circuitry make sense.
Yeah.
But if we learn to rewire our brain, that maybe then the the behavior or the action or even the negative self-talk isn't necessary anymore.
Like, yeah. And it doesn't stop there, because when it's not necessary anymore, then those little neurons, they find a different path.
Yeah. So there's so much there in with the brain and the trauma effect on our brains. And I remember reading it, create faulty circuitry. I really am visual, so I can get that going, oh,
Yes.
genie.
Yes.
The wires just are off center or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like looking through a different lens, you know? And if you think of every single person has a different lens that they look through. And I
Because of
think,
their
and
own experience.
absolutely. Have you ever heard people talk about, you know, as a client, they think, you know, I grew up in the same house as my siblings, you know, or even parents saying about their children, you know, we treat everybody the same, they've lived in the same environment. Why is everybody so different? Because experiences are so unique.
Yeah.
So a medical model is almost like a one size fits all.
Yeah.
That,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and I think that's where the dehumanizing aspect comes in, because the person is not seen in their unique experience.
Only the addiction.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, what's your take then on the 12-step program? Now, how about that for a loaded question?
Yeah. Well, you see, I suppose, yeah, we have to ask ourselves, is it working? I mean, if you look at the statistics of recovery, I don't know, is it working? Maybe it is. Maybe it works for people. I think it works for some people. That doesn't mean
Yeah.
it's going to work for everybody. They do talk about it here in the book that I'm reading. I should really base my own opinion, shouldn't I? But they do talk about it. I haven't read all of that. But
For me,
I
in
suppose
a
what,
society where there is nothing really, there's nothing else other than the medical model, that it's an other approach. When there's nothing
yeah,
else available to people, other like than what Vicky said, medications to plaster up the issues. I feel the 12 step is a start into that, having a look at.
but also, I suppose what I would say is, you know, you and I have been doing this work, and we meet people and we hear their stories and we listen to their experiences, and we serve as a witness to that. And now we've got all this neuroscience that has come in quite recently, relatively recently, that supports what we've been doing. You know, all those psychotherapists over there doing their hippy dippy stuff, you know, but neuroscience is coming in now and it is supporting what we do. So we're able to now put context not that we weren't able to put context on before, but we're able to use that as a context also. And I think that's probably giving us a little bit more scope. It's giving us a little bit more license maybe to open up the conversation. So it's not just about the medical model, or it's not just about the 12 steps. That 12 steps, I think, are still a little bit above the water in the iceberg. That's my sense. I think that maybe we still need to go a little bit deeper. And again, this is just from my experience of speaking to people who are going through it, and that there's still a little bit of not being heard, not being seen for their real authentic experience. Does that make sense?
Yeah. That's getting in below the iceberg, where to become aware of, or maybe conscious of, what happened to us could be also a factor in what we practice in order to self-regulate. Does that make sense?
Totally. But that's totally it. You know, it's driven by our trauma.
And again, speaking of trauma, it's really important to say, if you've been, I feel like a TV ad, if you've been affected by anything we're discussing here today, reach out. You can even reach out to us privately, or even here in the page, or even in your own locality, talk to somebody.
Yeah.
So that we're not poking at something here. And it's important that if you feel you're being triggered with it, to reach out. So sorry about that. That just popped into my head there, Frances.
No. You're right to say it. It's important to say those things, but I do believe it's a conversation that it needs to be had more. There's a great deal of shame that comes with addiction.
I was just about to pick up my book.
Even the derogatory terms that are used to describe, and it's criminalized also. That's another thing that Gabor talks about a lot. It baffles me really when I think about it.
Kathleen has joined us, and she said, ladies, you're right, the core of addiction, trauma.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what we can do afterwards is I'll put the link to that Gabor movie. I've seen it being advertised again on Facebook. Well worth the watch. And where he's out on the streets, where he's a medical doctor, but he worked on the streets with the homeless, with the addicts, being interested not just in the addiction, but in them.
Yeah. And going back to what Vicky, I think, said, it's so sad. I mean, it's so sad to think that we could be doing so much more. We really, really could.
So what does so much more look like, Frances? So it's easy to say we could be doing so much more. But what does that look like? Does it look like reaching out to people? Does it look like talking about it? I don't know. I'm not quite sure.
Well, talking to shame, the opposite to shame is support. Okay, so what's the biggest shame? Not the biggest shame, but in terms of it being criminalized, or there's a great shame attached to people going into treatment centers and rehab and So, taking the shame out of it.
But isn't there a fine line between support and enabling?
Well, you see, this is the thing. And look, I'm not an addiction specialist. I like to think that I support people who are trying to deal with their trauma. So, like anything, whether a trauma response is addiction or depression or anxiety or, issues around food, whatever it is, that when we get in underneath that and we see the person and they get a chance to make meaning of their life and their experiences, then what's up there just falls away.
Yeah.
That's a symptom,
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it's not an issue, but it's just, it's a symptom.
Yeah.
So sorry, I forgot what you asked me.
I suppose when I said, what does it look like to do something? You were talking about support, taking away from shame. And then I went on to say, well, there's a fine line by support and enabling. How do you balance that?
Okay, so I'm really going to, maybe speak out of turn here. I don't know. See the whole tough love thing?
Yeah.
I don't like the term tough love. I don't like it. Me personally, I don't like it. I don't entertain that idea. Tough and love, I just don't believe belong in the same sentence. There's a boundary. We can be boundaried and there can be containment. And I think support, when it is offered in a contained manner, I think that's nicer. It's just a more supportive, tough love. There's just shame all over that, isn't it? Isn't there?
Yeah.
To be tough with these people. These people need tough love. I don't.
Vicky was saying people need to hear it also to understand addiction. It triggers me, although I'm also happy you've both discussed it. It's all very complex. It is true you need to dig deeper under the iceberg. And the 12-step program doesn't work for everybody. I love the way Vicky just summarizes everything for us.
God, yeah, we're here rambling away, and Vicky just comes with these beautifully worded comments.
She should be part of the trio,
Yeah,
we ramble. Vicky summarizes. She's also said, Frances, where is it here? I can shut up. Frances, I can't sit with the poor me. Does that make sense? That's what I feel so difficult. Is that the poor me of the addict, Vicky? Or I'm not sure.
I suppose how I read it, and I might be totally wrong, Vicky, is that maybe she has no patience for the poor, the poor me, the victim.
The addict, yeah.
Yeah. So that again, it's about landing in that, gentler place, more compassionate place. It can be really hard to be compassionate with ourselves. And if we're not compassionate with ourselves, how can we be compassionate with other people?
And especially if addiction is in close proximity, like in family, and has had an impact on our lives growing up because of the addiction we lived with, then it's very hard to have any kind of compassion for the person who you perceived hurt you.
Totally. This is devastating stuff. That's, I think, part of the sadness. I mean, lives are being devastated by this, but I just feel we're not opening up the conversation enough.
Yeah.
It's restricted and it is a one size fits all. And for some it works. but not for everybody.
Vicky says she has no patience to understand why somebody can't snap
No.
out of it.
Oh yeah. Well, you see, I've been there. I've been in that place where, why can't somebody just stop?
Yeah.
Somebody can't stop out. Yeah.
And then she says, I've never had addiction herself, that. So
Yeah.
it's she's coming from a place of a different space. So,
Mm. Mm.
but it's like that. Why can't you just stop? What's wrong with you?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that tough love? Which is helpful?
Well, it's not really seeing what's happening. It's not seeing the full picture.
Yeah.
That kind of a question. So, and you can only imagine what that must sound like or feel like to somebody who is struggling.
Yeah.
As I said, nobody wakes up in the morning and thinks, I know what would be a great idea.
Yeah. To drink a bottle of wine before 11:30.
Mm-hmm.
So Kathleen has commented, government agencies should do a massive 5-year research with young offenders on trauma. This would be a good society. We had all the professionals, families of the offenders needing support, counsellors indoor and outdoor, also play therapy if we can. If we are informed, change lives and brains of many.
I
Wouldn't that be
agree with
lovely?
absolutely all of that. All of it. And
Yeah.
it starts with a conversation. I think it was that again, Gabor, we're leaning heavily on him today, but he talks about community, that what was he saying about community? People need the support of a community.
Mm.
I can only imagine that for an addict or somebody struggling with addiction, that it's very isolating.
And I think that's what I like about the 12-step program. It's like a community. There is a
Yeah.
family. You can go anywhere in the world and walk into a meeting anywhere.
Yes, and that is great. But does this not also let them just stay over there in their little corner and sort themselves out?
Yes.
Right? And,
Yes.
fix them, get themselves sorted, and then come back in and join the rest of us. I don't
Yes.
think that's fair. I think this is a community issue. It's a society issue. It's a trauma issue. And we all deal with trauma. It's a human issue.
Yeah. Yeah. And let's not go down the whole generational trauma thing. where it mightn't even be our trauma, but it's handed through our very DNA.
Yeah.
I mean, that's another ramble. That's another ramble, Frances.
Mm.
So I'm just looking at our time. We're doing really good. We're flying. We could keep going on this. Maybe we should do
I
another day
know.
on
And
addiction.
yeah, well, I think it's definitely a topic that we could come back to. We're supposed to check in with our people there and if they're all okay, and because it's a difficult one.
Yeah. Vicky, hang on. I'll put up Vicky's one here. Isn't it like mental health? You're banging on doors trying to find somebody to understand. Communities don't understand. They don't want to deal with addiction. Brings down the price of houses.
So we're dealing with the shadow, the collective shadow here. People don't want to look at it because it's messy, and it will hold up a big mirror to all of us. So yeah, and I don't mean to come across in any way dismissive of the 12-step program. I think if people find support there, you've got to get it where you can get it. I just think it's a little unfair that the wider society is leaving them to it.
It's kind of out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah.
So maybe just bringing it into people's minds like we've done today. Maybe that's where we start.
That's where we start. It's just starting the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. So if anybody wants to contact us, or if you've been triggered by anything we've talked about today, feel free. Leave a message here. We'll get back to you. And I think you're right, Frances, that this is something that we can keep going on with.
Yeah.
So,
and I don't think anybody, has to go really too far within their life to meet somebody who has been impacted by this in some manner,
Yeah. Whether they know addicts themselves, or they are an addict, or there's addiction in the family. Yeah. So no more tough love, isn't that it, Frances? Boundaried love. Is that
I know people would be, well, people don't have to agree with me, but that would be my stance on it.
Yeah.
I just don't see it fitting.
I was doing a bit of Googling this morning about addiction before we came on, about how really important it is, of all the things to be able to hold for the person within the addiction, is hope. Hope that there's a life without it.
Because that's what they're searching for. They're coming from that traumatized place, and they're looking for something. They're looking, as you said, to regulate. And then they stumble upon this, and it gives them comfort, and they think, so it's, hope. I think, have to hold on to hope and see the human.
Yeah. So thank you, everybody who's joined us. We've gone way over time today, Frances. Surprise, surprise. And we'll catch up for some more rambling on addiction again another time. And we're probably taking a few weeks off for the summer, like myself. So maybe we might come back in September for some more ramblings.
Yes, that would be lovely.
But just because we're not live doesn't mean that we can't be accessed. So there's a team here at counsellingonline.ie, not just myself and Frances. There's a big team behind us all. So you're not alone. Wherever you are, we are. Isn't that our motto?
That is, yeah. And it's true.
Yeah. And thanks everybody for taking part this morning. And Vicky, thank you for all your summarizing our ramblings. And we'll see you soon, Frances. Have a happy summer.
Yes, I hope the weather comes back to make it even happier.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
I'm glad I got the sea swims in that I got. But I will. Now I'm off for a couple of weeks. I'll be getting in the sea, regardless.
So that could be a healthy addiction, couldn't it? Sea swimming.
Healthy addiction. Does that make sense?
All right, before we get carried away again. See you, Frances. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Vicky's saying enjoy the holidays. See you soon. Thanks, Vicky.
Thank you.